it really struck me last fall. USDA released on their organic learning center a new video series about a certification of organic field crops. And they made it very clear in their press release that everything in that series only applied to soil-based organic crop production. Well, what's the corollary to soil-based? Well, it's water-based. What are the standards for water-based? There aren't any. What's the law to allow water-based production to be called organic? There's none. What are the videos, the guidelines, the certification guidance about water-based production? It doesn't exist. But yet certifiers are doing it, and USDA continues to allow it, not just turn a blind eye, but they're actually promoting. That is, to me, once hydroponic is organic, then organic becomes hydroponic.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Linley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label to distinguish organic crops grown in healthy soils and organic livestock raised on well-managed pasture. You just heard from Jim Riddle, the former chair of the USDA's National Organic Standards Board. He's the founder of the International Organic Inspectors Association and an advisory board member of the Real Organic Project. Jim Riddle's Minnesota organic berry farm is called Blue Fruit Farm, and it's been certified organic since the 1980s. It was also part of the Real Organic Project pilot program, and Jim helped us navigate how to run an inspection program with integrity.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm talking today with Jim Riddle. Jim, thank you so much.
Oh, it's an honor to be here, Dave. Thanks for the work you do.
Well, thank you too. Your work is very intertwined, and you're an elder in this, and you've been working for a long time on trying to bring and keep integrity in organic certification.
Right.
And of course, you're an early member of the National Organic Standards Board and a chair, and you also have done a lot of work on setting up training and verification for inspection. And I have some challenging questions around that.
Uh-huh.
It has occurred to me lately that as we have been marching towards more and more rigor in inspection and certification, there have been several consequences. One is that the cost of certification is going up fairly rapidly. And I'm not sure the cause and effect here, but it appears that the integrity is going down. As we get more and more rigor, I'm not sure we're getting more and more integrity.
Yeah, and I don't know that integrity is going down, but the number of producers with integrity is going down, whereas the number of producers without integrity is increasing. And as one example, I look at the Pasture Rule. We all wanted to get the Pasture Rule in place to make sure that all organic ruminant operations were putting their animals out in pasture. And essentially what it did is force all the operations that are in compliance to jump through extra hoops, keep extra records, and be inspected, increase the scrutiny on them, but yet the CAFO operations continued to operate without pasture. So we did is increase barriers for authentic organic dairy beef farmers to continue in business, increase their costs, increase the complexity, the kind of hassle factor of getting certified went up, whereas the CAFOs just continued business as usual. And that's one thing I worry. We now have the strengthening organic enforcement rule that's been released. It's got a year to be implemented. I worry about the same impacts there, that it's just going to squeeze the smaller producers, whereas the Driscolls of the world will just continue to operate because the strengthening organic rule does nothing to actually enforce the standards. What it does is increases the red tape and increases the workload for certifiers and the qualifications of inspectors. I think it's going to streamline the kind of issuance of certificates process from the USDA database, and it'll make it easier for buyers to verify that somebody is certified. But I do worry about its impacts, unforeseen impacts on the smaller producers and the smaller certifiers, and just increasing the complexity once again.
Yeah, I said in my talk earlier that I was concerned because the big rollout I saw of strengthening organic integrity, strengthening organic enforcement, SOE is what it's called.
Right.
I saw the big rollout was on a stage in California, and one of the people on the stage was a top person from Driscoll's, and she was celebrating what a wonderful step forward this is. And I thought, well, it can't be if you're celebrating it.
Yeah. I mean, the step that USDA needs to take if they want to strengthen organic enforcement is to enforce the provision in the Organic Foods Production Act that requires an organic crop production plan to address building and maintaining soil fertility. They're totally ignoring that legal requirement of OFPA. It's right in the law, but it's not transferred over into the rule, and it's certainly not transferred down through the accreditation certification process. And unless that is done, what we're doing is just kind of strengthening the greenwashing, because the consumers are now, they're able to buy organic produce year-round at any kind of store they want, major supermarkets, Walmarts, whatever, not knowing that those are greenhouse, and not just greenhouse, but hydroponic, nothing to do with soil, nothing to do with biodiversity or environmental protection, building the ecology of the system. Those essentially are from a food factories, plant factories, where it's inputs in, it's just approved inputs. And it really struck me last fall, USDA released on their organic learning center a new video series about a certification of organic field crops. And they made it very clear in their press release that everything in that series only applied to soil-based organic crop production. Well, what's the corollary to soil-based? Well, it's water-based. What are the standards for water-based? There aren't any. What's the law to allow water-based production to be called organic? There's none. What are the videos, the guidelines, the certification guidance about water-based production? It doesn't exist. But yet certifiers are doing it, and USDA continues to allow it, not just turn a blind eye, but they're actually promoting. That is, to me, once hydroponic is organic, then organic becomes hydroponic. You can't tell the difference, and consumers can't tell the difference. At the very least, there has to be labeling between these two types of production, because right now they're being sold as the same thing, and they're vastly different.
So I want to go back to the Pasture Rule, but let me ask you, I've heard you say that it's a big deal to the integrity of the National Organic Program that they're certifying hydroponic. Now, some people don't think it's a big deal. They go, well, it's a few crops.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, can you explain why it's a big deal for somebody who doesn't get it? They go to Walmart and they want to buy organic, or maybe they go to Whole Foods and they want to buy organic. Why is this a big deal?
Right. Well, they're being deceived because the law is very clear that to produce organic crops, you must maintain or build soil fertility. That's what the law says. And these are operations that don't comply with that, period. But yet they carry the same seal, the same word organic, as authentic crops that are grown in the soil that meet all of the requirements of the law and the regulation. But yet they are out there in the marketplace and the consumer knows no difference. And the hydroponically grown, the water-based crops are grown cheaper, so they can capture the market and squeeze out the authentic organic producers, because why would you pay more or oftentimes twice as much for what is labeled as the same? People don't know the difference. But based on my experience as being an organic soil-based berry producer in Minnesota for many years, we heard over and over again from our customers, we've never tasted blueberries this good. And they've been buying organic, but they've been buying hydroponic, which look like a blueberry, but they certainly don't have the flavor profile. They don't have the vitamins and minerals and bioflavonoids that you get from healthy soil, from growing those crops in healthy soil. So the consumer is actually being screwed in all of this. And meanwhile, the authentic organic farmer is having to compete with an allowed systemic fraud. And I got into the whole area first of organic farming, but then inspecting organic farms. I was inspector for 20 years, helped train organic inspectors all over the world because I wanted organic to mean something. I wanted it to mean something for the producers when they're paying the money, or I mean the consumers, the shoppers, when they're paying the money for it. I wanted to make sure it's authentic, but even more so for the farmers that are doing the right thing and really building the local ecosystem, enhancing the biodiversity of their operations, and building soil health, sequestering carbon, all of the benefits that come with real organic farming. I wanted to make sure that was represented in the marketplace. And I spent many years time with International Organic Inspectors Association, and then on the National Organic Standards Board. And I was worried about the Monsantos, the Pioneers, the biotech seeds, and all of them chipping away at organic standards. And what I wasn't aware of was the undermining from within that was happening. When I was on the NOSB, there were attempts, in the crops committee, a few people, well, we need to talk about hydroponic. And I was on the board at the time when the rule was being implemented. So it was a real pressure cooker. There were a lot of real issues we needed to deal with. But I always said that is so far outside of the scope of organic, it's a low priority for us on the board. Well, that was a naivete on my part. We should have taken it head on in 2002 when the rule first went final and said, where does it fit? It does not fit, and made a vote. And we would have had a very strong, decisive vote. The board did that in 2010, 12-1, I think the vote was. Clearly a decisive vote saying that hydroponic does not fit. And that was ignored right down the line. And they act like that recommendation never even was adopted. People talk about the vote that occurred in 2018 or 2017, which was a proposal to amend, clarify the earlier. And it failed, which meant that the earlier recommendation stands. It was not a defeat. It was just, it was not a recommendation. The board never recommended that hydroponic should be organic. They just failed to change the standing recommendation. So the 2010 recommendation clearly is the NOSB's final word thus far on that. And another thing that I'm very proud of that hasn't been changed from my time on the board is we adopted the principles of organic production and handling, which are clearly based in a soil fertility management system, building soil health. Those have never been changed either. And I think that should be mandatory reading for everybody coming on the NOSB. They should be mandatory reading for every USDA staff person that has anything to do with organic, is to understand what those fundamental principles are. They don't have the force of law, but they really capture the vision that is consistent all over the world.
So, okay. Actually, this all sounds wonderful. This is the system working as it should. By the time that the National Organic Standards Board actually addressed the issue, overwhelmingly, they said, no, the law is very clear, and we agree with the rest of the world. Organic must be based in healthy soil, not in hydroponic. And yet, that, along with, I think, 19 other recommendations in that decade, were not acted on by the National Organic Program.
Yeah.
So here we have a dilemma. This is, in my mind, a true failure of democracy, where our government is not playing by their own rules to protect us. The National Organic Program, as I said earlier, was really created not because they supported organic. They don't.
No, they were forced to. They opposed the Organic Foods Production Act.
That's
when
right.
It was introduced in Congress. They lobbied against it. It wasn't actually coming out of the agriculture committees. It was added on the floor vote to the 1990 Farm Bill that set the writing of rules all in motion. So USDA, and they really showed their cards in their first proposed rule in 1997, which would have allowed genetic engineering, sewage sludge, antibiotics, the refeeding of slaughter byproducts, all kinds of things that were prohibited under both non-government and state organic standards that already existed at that time. And when that came out, I read it. It was right before Christmas. I'm like, I need to do something. So I wrote very detailed comments with replacement language and submitted that in to USDA, and that really helped inform the 275,000 negative comments that USDA got swamped with, and then they withdrew that. But that was where they were coming from. You have to know that. That's what they envisioned for organic. That was their first attempt to weaken it. But the public rose up. Organic farmers, consumers, environmentalists said, no, this is not organic. And so then they did write something that was much more aligned with the NOSB recommendations that had been made, as well as with what law said and what existing certification standards. And I think we have a good standard, but it's not being enforced. And one thing I saw during my time on the NOSB is the corporate lobbyists are there every day. And maybe they used to work there last week, or they're gonna work there again next year. There's a really strong revolving door. They know each other. They socialize with one another. The lobbyists are there in DC. They don't have to fly in for some kind of a farmer fly-in once a year. No, they know that they knock on the doors and the doors open. And so they have the ears, not just of the members of Congress or the Senate, but also the agencies. And I saw that just starkly at USDA, that they really exert influence, and it's not even changing the rules or changing the law, it's how they're going to be enforced. And USDA clearly has the power to enforce the soil provisions in the law through their accreditation program. They really say what a certification agency can do. They can put their thumb down and tilt it one way or the other. And right now, for a number of years, they've been tilting it in the direction of hydroponic being allowed as organic.
Indeed, we've seen them putting their thumb down and threatening certifiers who won't certify hydroponic with penalties, and even possible decertification. So that's of course troubling. Now, do you think that the Pasture Rule is a good rule? Were it enforced, would it be effective?
Yes, I think it would. I think it was overly detailed. It's like, you want pasture, we're going to give you pasture. We're going to make you suffer. I mean, when you go to a dairy farm, it doesn't take long to tell whether the animals really graze or not. But now it has to be proven. And a farmer that's in a grass-based system has to jump through a lot of hoops. And it's like, what else do you think my animals are going to eat? But I have to prove it and show it, document how many days they're on pasture, if they're not, why they're not. But it's a mystery to me how the operations that are not meeting the pasture regulation are continuing to be certified. I don't understand it at all, because clearly this should be enforced fairly across the board, regardless of scale. And somehow these 10,000 head CAFO operations with a token pasture for dry cows at best are continuing to function with no real changes to their operation.
And you think if the Pasture Rule as it exists right now were enforced, then the large Auroras of the world would not be certified as organic.
They'd have to make some huge changes.
Huge changes.
They'd have to break up their herds, have smaller herds, and be irrigating pastures, not just the hay land that they harvest and bring the feed to. They'd have to make some changes. It wouldn't mean that they'd be out of business or that they wouldn't be certified, but they'd have to change how they function.
Yeah.
Big time.
Before I go to where I'd like to go next, let me just check in on poultry, because of course this has been a bleeding wound on the National Organic Program, is the certification of these hen factories. The chickens are entirely enclosed and never go out, 2 stories. It seems that they got in through kind of a regulatory action that, they actually, the first one was a company in Massachusetts.
Right, Country Hen.
And they got denied certification by Bay State Organic.
Right.
It's going, well, you don't qualify.
Yeah.
And they appealed that decision, and they won the appeal. Right. And that really set the stage for a lot of terrible things that have happened since.
Right.
My question is, we've got a situation where virtually no one in the room, except for the owners of these large confinement CAFO poultry operations, thinks these should be called organic. And yet Miles told me that over 70% of the eggs in the country were coming from those operations.
Yeah.
The eggs certified as organic.
Right.
Do you think that the OLPS, the new rule that's going through its many paces, do you think that will actually change anything?
Yeah,
aside from some ramps going down from the second story to the concrete?
It's hard for me to imagine. And part of it here, especially, it's really stark on the poultry issue. We're like victims of our own success. The market for organic eggs and poultry meat is so strong. Organic just makes sense. People understand that producing food in harmony with nature is going to be good for the earth and good for themselves. So they've been drawn to that label. The label is a success, and that attracts money. And so it ends up with fraudulent grain, stuff that's clearly fraudulent, being shipped over in not even container ships, cargo ships full of fraudulent grain coming into this country to feed these CAFOs, both dairy and poultry. But it's because there's a demand. So big business will always make the changes. They used to fight organic and deride it. Now they've tried to co-opt it and come just enough into compliance that they can capture the market.
Yeah.
And that's what we've seen happen. Once it's captured, it's hard to get it back. And it's unless there's like antitrust that breaks up some of these, like Driscoll's that have such a monopoly, I don't know that the organic regulation has the kind of power of statute as a regulatory priority to be enforced by the Department of Justice. And there's always going to be certifiers because they're profit driven too. They follow the money. And there's going to be some certifiers that are going to make things look good on paper, but yet they are empowering this whole corporate takeover kind of from within.
It's especially depressing to me to see that some of those very certifiers are outfits that were once champions to us, that the farmers themselves created 30 years ago. And I know that I had nothing but the highest regard for until I said, they're doing what? They're
Well,
certifying
right.
who?
I mean, certifiers used to be very democratic, and they used to control the standards. See, that's where your healthy debate at the grassroots level occurred, when they used to be in control of the standards. Once the standards were taken over by USDA, they didn't need people to be really involved. There was not the motivation to come to the meetings and be engaged. It became much more of a business model. Much more driven by how many clients and how big a clients, because the bigger they are, the more they pay for certification services. So it's just been kind of a upward trend, and losing that democratic voice that certifiers used to play in the larger organic community.
Okay, so we got a situation, we're aware of it, where even if we get a good rule passed, as in the case of the Pasture Rule, it does not appear to be enforced.
Yeah.
And in the case of hydroponics, even though if we have a good law, the National Organic Program is very open about saying, no, we certify hydroponics.
Right.
So that's not even fraud on the part of the producer.
Yeah.
It might be fraud on the part of the USDA, but that's the situation. The one glaring obvious fraud that everyone, I think, agrees about is falsely labeled grain.
Yeah.
Which is a multi-million-dollar swindle. Right. And Congress says this must stop, and USDA says this must stop, and nobody will publicly say, no, this should continue. So, and maybe the SOE will stop that, maybe.
Yeah.
We hope so. We hope so.
Yeah, the new requirement for import certificates. There's going to be some new hoops to jump through, but it's amazing what money can do as a motivator to find ways to slip through those hoops, though, too. So, we'll see how it goes. But, one of the other things that is not being addressed is that the law, at the very beginning of the Organic Foods Production Act, it states the purposes, why the law is, and the second purpose of the Organic Foods Production Act is to create a consistent standard. Well, now we clearly have 2 tomatoes, 2 blueberries that are produced in totally different production methods following different standards. One just has to not use prohibited inputs, and it can be certified organic. Water-based, nothing to do with the ecology, nothing to do with soil health at all. It only has to comply with one set of standards. The other, the soil-based, is complying with the full law, the full set of the regulations. So you have one of the fundamental purposes of the Organic Foods Production Act is being totally violated, because we have 2 organics now. It's really, I'm thinking about writing a new article called The Tale of 2 Organics, because they're very different. And you look at what's taken over the marketplace for a number of vegetables and berries in particular, and that is the hydroponic model has really taken over the marketplace. I'd like to see some economic analysis to know just what we're dealing with. How big is this economically, and who are all the companies and house brands? A lot of it's going out under house brands that are labeled by the supermarkets or Walmart or whatever, that have their own lines, Target, etc. So how much of the blueberry market are the hydroponic organic versus soil-grown organic? I would just like some ag economists to do the research to track that down and give us some real numbers to be able to see how big the problem is. And then I'd also really like to see a nutrient analysis of the products themselves, because I think you're going to see very different nutrient composition, vitamins, minerals, and certainly the antioxidants, the bioflavonoids being much lower in the water-based production model versus the soil-based production model. And I remember a number of years ago, research from UC Davis comparing soil-grown conventional tomatoes to organic soil-grown tomatoes, and where in the organic system they were following the rules, and the soil organic matter was being increased, and the crops were being rotated, and they found that the bioflavonoid content just kept going up every year, whereas the conventional tomatoes on a standard NPK diet just stayed flat. They looked like a tomato, but they didn't taste like one, and they certainly didn't have the nutrition of that soil-grown organic one. And I suspect that you'd find very similar results comparing hydroponic organic versus real organic.
Yes, and probably, I would also say comparing, CAFO mixed dairy ration milk to milk from cows out on pasture.
Oh, for sure, yeah. Right.
Okay, so we have a grim reality here.
Yeah.
And I know that Kevin Engelbert from the NOSB told the story of a whole host of legal actions going up against Aurora by the USDA, and then they were dropped. Mysteriously, they just went away. It appears that regulatory reform, I won't say it's impossible, we must never give up, but let's just say at the moment it's a bit of a long shot. And so in your mind, as somebody who cares about this and who has worked a lot in his life to try and build a real organic system, where's your happy place? Where do you go for hope? What do you imagine is the best way for us to move forward?
Yeah. Well, I think at the core, understanding, educating that organic works, organic ecological production systems do build soil organic matter, do enhance biodiversity, and do produce abundant, healthy foods, sustainably, regeneratively. Real organic works. So we just gotta always keep that and teach our children that, and keep working with producers, buying from producers who understand and practice that. So, but also just helping build local food systems, planting gardens, growing things yourself, as just being in touch with nature is the place to start. But then knowing where your food is coming from, everybody's heard that before, but really internalizing that and practicing that. So I think doing the things that we can ourselves to begin with. But then I think exposing the companies, the names of the companies, raising awareness, who these are, so then shoppers can make better informed choices, because organic is not all the same. We got two very different standards being enforced now in this country, but yet they're labeled the same. So I think raising awareness about the realities is part of it. But I do think that there was a court ruling last fall, but it was more about some administrative steps, whether USDA followed their own rules in allowing hydroponic to be certified organic. I think that is open to challenge. It went beyond just whether they followed their administrative procedures and made some blanket statements about organic really is just about approved inputs. No, it's not. The law says much more than that. And so I think that needs to be challenged legally. So I think some good lawyers should look at that case and what the judge's ruling said and take it head on. I don't know that it should be an appeal of that, because that was based on an administrative question. I think they should take the standards issue head on, and the law requiring organic soil management and a consistent standard. I think those two grounds right there should be challenged in courts of law. But I do think our elected members of the House and Senate at the federal level need to be educated as well. So I think people should contact their members and let them know, hey, this is going on. We're not happy with it. Is there anything that can be done, a rider on the upcoming farm bill, to say organic means soil-based, like we said in 1990, and put some pressure from Congress on to USDA. I don't know that would, but it certainly is one area to focus on. Another that I have been in some discussions is with our trading partners. There are a number of reciprocity agreements, like the European Union accepts stuff from the US as organic without having to, recertify or whatever, and vice versa. But those agreements were based on an understanding that hydroponic was not allowed as organic in the US. And we're making them, our trading partners, more aware of what's really happening. In that court case, that put it real clear that in the US, it's just about inputs. It's not about all the requirements in OFPA that we base this reciprocity on. So I think pressure from our trading partners to say, nope, we're not taking these Driscoll berries anymore as organic. You can ship them to us, but not under the organic label. So I think economic pressure, that's what gets people's attention. And so consumers saying, oh, I'm at the supermarket, here's Driscoll's organic blueberries versus their conventional berries. The organic are twice as expensive. I'll just buy the conventional, or I'm not going to buy from Driscoll's at all. I think exerting power of the purse is certainly good. And then, like I said before, more research about the differences, exposing the differences with some science about the nutrients. That's going to catch some headlines and let people know, hey, there's some organic that you can trust, there's some you can't.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember the number. I think it might have been 300 million that the USDA has committed to helping people transition to organic.
Right.
It's a huge amount of money.
Right.
And I thought, my goodness, if you just spent 30 million, 3 million on enforcing the actual law, if you did enforce the law, you wouldn't need to do so much work to get people to transition. They would transition. People would come because they could make a living.
Well, right, and it would be a dependable, stable market where they knew their certification meant something.
Back in 2016, it looked like Vermont might go all organic on their dairy. I mean, there was so much transition going on because it's where small family farms could make a living.
Right, and there was a good pay price.
And since then, in 5 years, since 2017, a third of the organic dairies in Vermont have gone out of business.
Yeah.
Because the pay price has dropped as the CAFO milk has flooded the market.
Right. They're competing with operations that should never be certified in the first place. That's right. But yeah, I think raising awareness, which the Real Organic Project has done a great job of, but I think there's a need for legal action, and I think there's more need for international trade pressure.
Good. All right. Well, we'll keep working on those things. We're certainly talking to the international community now. We're doing a joint venture with Naturland.
Right.
And they're very respected in that world, and so we have friends in the rest of the world who do care about Real Organic very much. And I they know that what happens in America is a big deal because we're a huge part of the world market for organic food.
Well, what you have huge plant factories in Mexico, in Canada, in the Netherlands, that are shipping their products that are certified as organic to the US that could not be labeled as organic in their own countries. And then those are dumped in the US market and flooding our market and undercutting the real organic farmers with products that they couldn't even sell as organic in their countries of origin. And then we can turn around and repackage them and ship them back out to Europe as a USDA organic product that maybe came from somewhere else in the world where it could not have been certified under their own federal laws.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, we're what's the word? Laundering.
Yeah. Right.
Products for these cartels. All
right. Well, before we go, Jim, do you have any last thoughts you want to share?
Well, yeah, you mentioned I'm part of the elder crowd now, and yeah, I've been at it a while, and I really organic integrity does mean a lot to me, and I encourage people to continue to stay engaged. Organic is our word. USDA has certain responsibilities, but they need to be under the microscope. People need to continue to serve on the National Organic Standards Board, to stay engaged in the debate and keep fighting for organic integrity. I have no regrets. It's been I've met so many wonderful people, it's been a privilege to do the work that I've done, just because it's been a rich life. And organic does work. It just does work. And let's hang on to that, and let's keep making it work. And let's just keep calling out the people that are taking advantage of the success we've had.
Wonderful. Jim Riddle, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Dan.
you for all the work that you do and continue to do. I watch with great admiration. I know that you're out there fighting the good fight.
Yeah, I'm mostly raising grandchildren
Yeah.
and having a good time, and cross-country skiing and fishing and kayaking and hiking and trying to be retired. But it's something I still continue to care about, and I just can't shut my mouth.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. This movement is growing because you're subscribing and sharing these podcasts with your friends. If you leave us a rating and a review, that helps others find us too. As always, you can find a video version of this interview at realorganicproject.org and by subscribing on our YouTube channel. Join us next week when we'll be hearing from Hannah Smith-Brubaker, the Executive Director of PASA, a Pennsylvania-based sustainable agriculture organization focused on research and education for organic farmers.